Hey there, this is Dan, you're watching the Salty Sea, and this is my recap of the Sunday competitive event which I played in at Adepticon. If you want to see my coverage of the Saturday event, which was a little bit bigger, you can check it out. I'll link to it in the description down below. I'm also going to be putting out a tournament recap of the narrative event, along with kind of some thoughts on narrative gaming in general. But for now, I just wanted to talk about this one. I'm going to start with the winning list, which was an Evocator Prime on Dracoline, so a Thundercat boss with the blade and stave, and then 3 Thundercats with their blade and stave, so none of the grand stave ones. I couldn't believe it, but I did have a great time talking with Justin at the tournament about his list, just about also the game and life in general. Really great dude. So why don't I just let him kind of tell you about his list in his own words. I'm here with Justin, who just won the second Warcry event at Adepticon. He also took the same list in the narrative event. You were 5-0-2 on the weekend. Yeah, tell me about your run with the cats.
Well, I picked as I told you before, I picked the list because in one of your recent videos, you had made a comment about most lists are not competitive unless they have at least 6 models. And as I was looking through the Stormcast, because I've always wanted to play them, but they're always overcosted and too slow. I saw that these guys had gone down, and I could fit 4 in one list. I could be the good guys. I could try to break your principle.
Yep.
And I thought it was worth the challenge, so I picked it.
Yeah. So they were really effective. Can you tell me a little bit about how the warband plays? And I think a lot of people might see basically 4 big dragons on the board and think like maybe this is kind of a gimmick list or like a one-trick pony list, but it seemed like you had a lot of options at your disposal kind of all the time, right?
So the one thing that sets these things apart from the other cavalry units, are they don't have the mount trait, so they can climb, they can go through doors, so they're super fast. They're movement 10. I can project power anywhere I want on the board, basically every turn. So they don't have the highest damage compared to some of the other options in Stormcast, but they're pretty good, and they're strength 5 and they're toughness 5, so they're durable. They've got high hit points, and I can just pinpoint where I need to be and send them. And that's what the advantage. I don't have as many models, but whereas I might with a list with 8 or 10 models, and it's taking 2 activations to get over to a place, I'm getting there with them in 1 activation and still being able to do damage. It was a really fun list to play because they're leaping across the board and just pouncing on troops, and nobody's safe.
And you only lost 2 cats the entire weekend. Is that true? Or at least in the competitive event, you only lost 2 cats. Did you lose any in the narrative?
I did lose in the narrative event 1 cat.
Okay.
Because of a blunder. It was a mission where you had whoever killed the most models or the most points per round gets a victory point. And so I was hunting the orcs, and I thought that the orc that I charged was a Argoy. No, it was the leader.
Oh no!
Leader, the biggest damage dealer, and I just handed myself to him.
Oh no!
So that was the 1 cat I lost during the narrative event. This time, ironically, it was cats that took down the cats.
The Untamed Beast cats.
Yes.
So how were you able to keep them so safe, right? Because your opponent's only focusing on 4 models, right?
Right. Well, he has to get to them.
Yeah.
Right? And I can disengage. If I've got a hurt cat, I can disengage and move 10 inches away. That's 13 inches away. They're not going to come and catch me and be able to do damage. So I can use him for something else. I can send him over to an objective if he's injured, and then bring him in at the right time to pounce on somebody else after they've activated on the next one.
Yeah.
So it was just really hard to tie them down with the amount of health that they have and their toughness with toughness 5. There's just, besides the orcs, there wasn't many people that could handle that.
Right.
So, yeah, it was really hard to kill them. They take enough damage. I decided, hey, this guy's out of it for now. disengage and I'm out, and they can't catch me. So,
Yeah. Well done. Congrats on doing so well. 5-0-2 again for everybody, with just four big Thundercats. It's awesome.
All right.
So a pretty incredible story there from Justin. I love that he put the list together specifically to prove me wrong. I thought that was really funny. And at first I really couldn't believe that they would do so well, but that's because I assumed you really need bodies in at least the previous version of the game. Now I'm going to do a list another time, probably next week, about why for the most part you still do need that. I think most of the successful lists had it. But certain types of setups can ignore that rule now. And Justin was talking to me off camera about the reason why sort of some warbands can ignore the need for bodies and others can't is the fact that 4 rounds make durability really important, as long as you also have projection. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the Sylvaneth list that won the previous tournament as well, both lists are not the highest damage output lists, but they're very good at making it so that all of their damage is being applied, right? There's a difference between applied and implied output in a list, right? And this list is incredibly good at making sure that every single turn, every unit in the list is being maximized. And I think that's really important here, and important to take a look at. The kind of durability thing is also a buff to any kind of attrition-based warband, right? Anyone who really wants to be sticking around. He told me that there were several of games that he won where he started behind on points after round 1, and he was able to catch up. So I think that that's a really good lesson to take into future lists. I think that I just think that playing against this list is really difficult. It's not like you can't do anything about it. He did have 2 draws on the weekend. You could definitely sort of concoct scenarios where the cats are going to be less effective, but man, if you're not specifically thinking about them, I think you're going to really struggle. And also, they really let a good player flex as far as the choices they let you make, compared to the choices your opponent makes, right? Your opponent has very few choices, and you have a lot. I see, one thing in Magic that you see the pros say a lot is that you want to be making all of the choices, and constricting what your opponent can do. One thing I hear a lot of AOS top players say is they want to force their opponent to make choices, to make the mistakes. I actually really think that's wrong. I really think that the pro Magic players have it right, where if you allow your opponent to make choices, they have the opportunity to make good choices, and you will lose. Now, if they do make the mistake, you were probably going to win anyway, and maybe that's just an artifact of the fact that at the average AOS tournament, there's not a lot of gamers there, so I think people are making mistakes, right? I mean, there's the classic kind of, anytime you kind of force your opponent into bad decisions, if they haven't considered those, it can be tough. But with Thundercats, and a lot of other sort of high projection lists, instead of you forcing your opponent into misplays, or baiting your opponent into misplays, they allow you to flex in a way that constricts the choices your opponent can make, and I think that can be really effective, and it's something I'm probably going to think about with list building in the future. So now into my run at the tournament. I went 3-1 with Skaven. Here's my list. It was in the Hammer, I had 2 Plague Monks and 2 Giant Rats. In the Dagger, I had this Storm Fiend, and a Plague Monk and a Giant Rat. And in the Shield, I have this Archvillain Games conversion Plague Priest, along with a Plague Censer Bearer. You can see him over on the left there, with the little flail, and 1 Plague Monk and 1 Giant Rat. I went 3-1 with this. I'll talk about whether I was happy with it or not later. My first round was against Shane. He was on Soulblight Gravelords. He had a list with a ton of units of Vargoyle that was sort of flying around the board, very scary, and then lots of Graveguard. Really, Graveguard also do a great job, I think, taking advantage of 4 rounds, because their slower move can be a bit of a liability there. But he has the Vargoyle to do important movement early in the rounds, and then he also just he can move forward with the Graveguard. On objective missions, you have to come to the Graveguard, and then, point for point, they're very durable. They are going to, outlast whatever they're fighting against. So even though they're cheap and small, this is a warband where it's a chaff-heavy warband that is built to go 4 rounds. And I really love that. I think he did a better job building to the kind of new objectives of the Home of Champions than I did. In our game, unfortunately, we got started late, so we only got to finish 2 rounds, which is too bad because I think it would have developed into some really interesting play and counterplay in the later rounds. In round 1, he rolled a Rampage, so it was a lot of me trying to bait him into popping the Rampage early with certain weight actions, with certain moving sort of into weird terrain placement actions. And Shane just played really well, played very patient, and then waited until very late in the round when he could use the Rampage to get maximum value. Agent was able to kill 2 different things and land on an objective. The 2 different things he killed were on 2 different objectives because of the Vargoyle's movement. It was a very slick play, and I liked it a lot. In round 2, I was kind of able to punish the final landing spot of the Vargoyle by putting a ton of damage on it. However, it escaped on 2 health, which was really sad. And then we didn't end up finishing, so he ended up winning 4-3 on points there. So it was a close game. I think if we'd played more rounds, it would have continued to be close. He wouldn't have been able to leverage the Vargoyle as effectively because it was only on 2 health, but it still would have been able to drop down and kill something the next round. No telling really what would have happened. He ended up finishing 3-1. His only loss was to that Thundercats list. Just kind of every other game, I think he just really crushed a lot of people, which is great. Great to see, and any lover of Soulblight Gravelords would definitely behoove themselves to kind of glom onto the list he played. Round 2, I played Tyler on Nighthaunt. Really awesome guy, really incredibly painted bases on all of his miniatures. I really liked the blending on the Nighthaunt, on the cloaks as well. His list was really cool, showcasing some of the buffs that Nighthaunt have gotten. He ended up going 2-2 in the tournament, winning both his games after this, right? So proving that I think the round 4 thing of comboing with the Nighthaunt ability is a really big buff to them, and the points buffs they got are also a really big buff to Nighthaunt that I think bring them up into playability in a new way in the Tome of Champions. List also the Dreadblade Harrow and the Knight of Shrouds. The Knight of Shrouds was incredibly effective in this game. He was able to put it right on where my next group was going to deploy, so I had to deploy in combat with him. I did the same thing with my Storm Fiend and his deployment group, and the tactic worked very well for both of us. His Knight of Shrouds just absolutely wrecked everybody in my deployment group. My Storm Fiend was able to take out two fighters in his deployment group, so really fun game. Ended up pretty close. I ended up pulling it out. But yeah, Tyler's a great guy, and shouts to you. That was a really fun game. Alicia on Stormcast Vanguard was my next opponent. She had Knave Blacktalon as a Knight of Zeros, and then some Hurricane Raptors, some Griffhounds, and Aetherwing. This is another one that was just really well built, I thought, for the Tome of Champions missions in particular. Vanguard had a ton of nerfs in the Tome of Champions, which kind of made it a lot harder to list build with that faction. And Alicia decided, to kind of double up on Hurricane Raptors for the power projection, to only run 1 Aetherwing, because now that they're so high costed, running a ton of them in these 4-round missions, I think doesn't really work as well as it did before, because, both their lack of durability sort of brings them down in the long missions, and the massive nerfs that they got. Going up to 65 points from 45 makes them a lot less attractive. This was one of the most strategically intense games I've ever played of Warcry, in terms of, we were actually tied after 4 rounds. Alicia went first, but didn't have her Aetherwing on the board to be able to we were on Hidden Treasures. She didn't have her Aetherwing on the board to just be able to fly and then go somewhere I could never ever catch her. So she grabbed the objective with a dog, but then I was able to surround the dog, and she had to expend a lot of resources to get it out of trouble. And then I was able to, because she had to expend so many resources saving the dog, I was able to kind of backdoor and steal one of the treasures that she had put down, because she didn't have any place where she could put it where I couldn't get to it because of the Skavens. The Skaven are just so fast, right? So that let me kind of catch up on points because she had been ahead in the early part of the round. But there was a ton of stuff where just every inch of movement placement ended up mattering. So every single time we placed something in round 2, it mattered in round 3. Every single time we placed something in round 3, it mattered in round 4. These are the things where we like to talk about how lists, some lists are good, some lists are bad, some lists just win a game. This was not really the lists at all. It was just every single inch of placement. She actually was kind enough to point out a misplay that I made, afterwards. And I really appreciated that. Some people, when they point out your misplays, they can't do it in a way where you feel good and glad that you learned something. She did, and I really appreciate anyone who has the kind of not street smarts, but just personality to be able to pull that off. I think that that's a really valuable thing in gaming in general, to be able to make good play fun and personable. I think is really, really solid. And then Alicia also won Best Painted. So we were tied after 4 rounds. There was kind of a tense moment actually in this game that I think a less mature opponent, it might have turned into kind of a dicey moment, but luckily Alicia's just really chill. Basically, we were tied after 4 rounds. The tournament organizer then has the opportunity to basically we go to him and say, do you want it tied? We had plenty of time left in the round. Do you want it tied, or do you want to use a tiebreaker? Because the rules say that there's only wins and losses unless there's other circumstances. So basically, the tournament organizer had the option to say the tie goes to whoever's killed the most things, or the tie means you play another round. I think those were the 2 reasonable ways to resolve that. And he chose play another round, and so I ended up winning the 5th round. And I could see someone being frustrated that it went down that way. But it ended up great, and just a really awesome person to play against. Round 4, I played against Nicholas on Thunderstrike. The board is cleared away now. This was the last round of the tournament. His list was a Lord Imperatant, some Vindictors, and some Praetors. Unfortunately, this game ended up being one of those frustrating games where it was on Nexus of Power. Giant Rats are basically unbeatable on Nexus of Power, and so my list kind of won the game for me, unfortunately. So we kind of had a bit of a non-game. He was a really great sport about what could have been NPE on my end towards him. He said at one point, I play 40k competitively, so I appreciate the value of a fast cylinder. He kept talking. He kept making the joke that my giant rat, he wouldn't call them giant rats, he called them fast cylinders, which I thought was really funny. And it's very accurate, especially on Nexus of Power. Giant rats really are just fast cylinders. That's all they are. So this one ended up being kind of a weird game, but he was a really fun person to play against. I was really thankful in general at this tournament. Some people have this idea of competitive play in their minds, that it's this kind of cutthroat, mean thing, and all of my games ended up being just a really great time, in a way that, if you're ever worried about going to a competitive Warcry tournament, at least based on my experience, don't be. It was a really great time. I also wanted to give my thoughts on my list. I built it pre-Tome of Champions. I'm a pretty slow painter, so I wasn't able to kind of take the tome and then paint up something new to kind of react to it. And so my list lost an entire Plague Monk, basically. And I really felt it on a lot of these missions, just having one more, especially because Plague Monks are really where the majority of the list damage comes through. You would think it's the Storm Fiend, and probably in terms of total numbers output, it might be the Storm Fiend. But the Plague Monks are all over the board, doing a surprising amount of damage, fishing for those 5 damage crits, and they also really shock opponents sometimes, where with that 6-inch movement, sometimes I'll put Rush on them and then run 14 inches across the board, and you know, I had several opponents be sort of surprised at just how far 14 inches really is. Um, so, you know, just having one less Plague Monk, I think, really brought this Skaven list down to earth as far as its power on the table. I really couldn't decide whether I liked the list or not. 3-1 is solid and is more than solid. It's very good, and I'm definitely happy with it. 75% win rate in any game is just very, very happy, and something you should always be pretty pleased about. So I just kind of fell into this trap of fixating on the one game I lost and wondering how I could have built the list better. You know, because when you're list building for a competitive event, you hope to have multiple games where your list just wins the game for you. And I only had one like that, and I kind of thought that I would have at least two where my list won the game for me. So that kind of has made me think about what I would change, what I wouldn't change. It's definitely a strong list that was really good. Definitely something that you could play in your games, and it would be very successful, I think. But something else you could try would be dropping a Giant Rat and a Plague Monk for a Warp Fire Thrower in the Hammer. Just because the Giant Rats, I still think you want one in each deployment group. But the fourth one, I wasn't that pleased with. I think the fourth one you could get a little bit more value somehow. I'm not sure how. So in this case, I'm wanting to drop the fourth one to upgrade the Plague Monk to a Warp Fire Thrower. I do wish there was a way to kind of you know, find something in between Plague Monks and Giant Rats to then run two of there. But I think a Warp Fire Thrower, those are the Skaven Archer that's good. There's another Skaven Archer that's really bad. But the Skaven Archer that's good is the Warp Fire Thrower. And I would really want to test that. I'd really want to test this setup. I think that just having that shooter could be really helpful in certain situations. I also just want to note, I still think that the best Skaven list is still using a Rat Ogre and a Packmaster. Basically, you'd take this setup and do a Rat Ogre Packmaster, or you would have a Master Molder and a Rat Ogre, or you would have Scritch Spike Claw, and then you would still include a Rat Ogre and Packmaster, etc. There's a lot of ways to set up Skaven lists that I do think are a little bit stronger than this one, where you revolve around having a Rat Ogre in your list. You can even do 2 Rat Ogres. My one thing with that is the Rat Ogre sculpt is just so ugly that I refuse to run it, and Storm Fiends are just so beautiful that why would you play anything else? So that's my own personal handicapping, but I do think Rat Ogres are much stronger if you want to really min-max your Skaven lists. Just some final thoughts on the competitive tournaments as a whole, not sort of their implications on strategy, but just what it was like to play in them. It was really cool that there was a wide mix of lists. There was a lot of different flavors of Stormcast, and then there was 3 Soulblight Gravelords players and I think 2 Untamed Beasts players. The double Rocktusk Prowler, there might have been 3 UB players. The double Rocktusk Prowler lists were really doing well at the tournament. No one went 3-1 with one, but they were pretty much only losing to the players who were doing really well. I think having 2 of those cats is really difficult for a lot of people to deal with. You know, there's the meme of the bespoke warbands cannot beat the AOS warbands that I get really frustrated by. Untamed Beasts were proving that wrong. They were basically, you know, in the competitive events they were going 2-2, but in the one person went 2-1-1 with one. But in the narrative event, someone did go 3-0 with a Untamed Beast list. So I think Untamed Beasts with 2 cats was definitely proving itself as a quality setup for Warcry. For the most part, it was really people looking to have fun. There were people who wanted to win, but everyone just noted, listen, if you're just going to be really cutthroat, there are other GW games that you can be cutthroat with. So people were just very sort of pleasantly competitive in these games, which I thought was really awesome, and I just really loved to see that. And I think that that's kind of a real good sweet spot for Warcry moving forward, and I just thought it was really, really encouraging. I also wanted to shout out the tournament organizers in general. First of all, the TO just set up incredible terrain. Every terrain board that he set up was just mwah, chef's kiss. Terrain boards everywhere. Just really liked all of it. I think in general, tournament organizers are really underappreciated. I asked for his picture. He said yes, but he also seemed like he was hesitant to say yes, so I'm not going to put his picture up here, but he was a great guy. He, I think, did a really awesome job being asked to do the impossible, which was run a Warcry event for a game he had not played in 3 years. Basically, they were looking for TOs in the Adepticon staff who were willing to run an event, and very few of them had ever played Warcry. And he had played it a tiny bit, but not for a very long time. And he was game to give it a try and to run the event, and I think he did an awesome job. The TO community in general is not aware that Warcry exists, I would say. I noticed, and this is again not a criticism of TOs because it's not on them to be interested in this game, right? But the players in these events looked very different than the TO community looks. Now that's not a judgment on TOs. It's just saying it's a very younger crowd, a very kind of different sort of background crowd that are interested in Warcry, and that means that we need. So first, the TOs that I saw were very interested in us. I have emailed TOs for other events, and they have basically said, yeah, we would love to run Warcry. We just don't know anything about it, and we don't know if there's a scene. So we need someone else to come in here and help us out, right? I think that the next step for Warcry for anyone who wants to get games going is, a lot of us are at younger points in our hobby journey than a lot of the TO community is. We're going to need to step up to join them. They are willing to include us. They're just not willing to sort of learn this brand new game themselves to sort of do it for us. And I don't blame them, right? It's not on them to do that. So I think, if you are interested in events and you play a lot of Warcry, I would email your, local game store owners. I am going to be doing that sometime this week. Email some people who run AOS events in your area, right? Try to find out who those TOs are. Email them about, if they can sort of help give you a leg up into you doing some of the work for organizing a Warcry tournament. I think that's how it's going to go down. I don't think that LGS owners are just going to run this out of the blue. And so I think we're just going to need to see a lot of Warcry fans maybe take that step. You don't have to do it all, right? You can be very upfront. I've never done this. I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. But in my experience from these TOs, they're very willing to help. They're just not willing to do it on their own without someone who's into the game. So I think that that's the next step for the Warcry community, and I really hope that people will try that out. One final thing I wanted to note was just a thing I learned about Adepticon in general. There were massive Sunday no-shows at every event. This might have just been this particular, maybe it's like it's been so long since people have done a con that they overestimated their endurance for it all. Maybe people partied too hard on Saturday. I don't know. I got my partying in on Friday, so I wouldn't have to be in a tough spot for Sunday morning. So who knows what it was, but there were a lot of no-shows at this tournament. We did get 8, which is the perfect number for running a tournament, a small tournament, but yeah, there were a lot of no-shows at this tournament. There were a ton of, I was looking over at the AOS event. There were like half as many people at the AOS event as there had been the day before. Maybe not, there were more than half, but there were significantly fewer people than there were the day before. And that was the same event. People went to day 1 and then no-showed day 2 of that event. All the sort of other games that were in the same hall had very small numbers compared to Saturday. So I do hope that Adepticon kind of takes that into consideration for future tournaments. That sort of Sunday is a great day for day 2 of a 2-day tournament. It's not a great day for its own tournament in general. And who knows, maybe that won't be true next year. Maybe this was kind of an idiosyncratic thing of this Adepticon, but definitely something to keep in mind. So that's that's the story for my first competitive Adepticon tournament. I was really into it. I'm going to talk about the narrative as well. I had a great time there. Getting to play 7 games of Warcry against people I had never met before was just so awesome. I met a ton of folks who, I think I'm going to be keeping in touch with for a long time. And I'd heard other content creators, other sort of people who just talk about the game online. I had heard lots of people say that that's a thing that happens in cons, is that you meet your people, and I didn't know how true that would be. I think that was really amazing. So yeah, just had a great time at Adepticon, and if you're listening to this and you're on the fence about going to one of these kind of conventions in the future, I would say absolutely do it. Absolutely sign up for these tournaments. I know that it can be a little bit intimidating, but it's 100% worth it. So anyway, I'm gonna at least be doing a recap of the narrative event, and then some thoughts on sort of the new lessons in list building and competitive Warcry that is sort of coming out of these events, along with hopefully collaborations with some other content creators I met at the tournament. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.